Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in Volume 3, Chapters 81 through 90. And the way that we start this class is we start with a brief meditation just to prepare the mind for studying. This way you can learn the teachings more readily and you can retain the teachings for a longer period of time and actually apply them in your daily life. So we'll start with a little brief meditation with just some light guidance, and then we'll move into the actual studying part of the class, where we'll be looking at each of the individual 10 chapters, and I'll invite students in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read the individual chapters out loud, and then after the chapters are read, I will share teachings on that particular chapter and open up to any questions that you might have. You'll be able to ask questions through Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom by putting that into the comment section, or in Zoom you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So welcome to the class, and I'd like to invite you to join for meditation, and then if you'd like to continue to stick around for the learning part, you're welcome to do that as well. So go ahead and take a position in either seated, lying, or standing. These are usually typically good for online learning. And make your body comfortable, not luxurious and not painful, but comfortable. And then if you'd like to join in with these chants, you're welcome to join in with these. There's nothing mystical or magical around these chants. It's not a prayer or a worship. It's just to ease the mind into meditation and get more benefit out of the meditation. If you're not joining in the chants, you might decide to just close the eyes and start focusing on the breath and start breathing in and out until I get to the point where I share some guidance with you. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Abhivateyami Savakhato Bhagavata Tammo Dhammang namasami Supatipano bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang namami. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho Vicacaranang sammuno Sakato roka โตอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภาควาติ Okay, if you'd like to just take some nice breaths in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. Breathing in gradually through the nose, establishing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled. Just breathing in through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And when you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full exhale. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Once the breath is established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath or the sensation of air moving into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go. Come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to label the thought, observe it, analyze it, or anything like that. Just wherever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut it off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. Breathing in and out. สัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาพุทธังมหาเขวันนังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมโมโนสัคคะโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ All right, if you guys would like to gradually make your way out of meditation, we can transition over to our class to study the words of the Buddha. Using volume 3 of this book series, we're in chapter 81, which is titled The Simile of the Tortoise. If there's anyone in Zoom that would like to volunteer to read these chapters, you're welcome to volunteer by just raising your hand electronically, and you'll be able to volunteer to read each chapter. And then I'll share teachings afterwards and then open up to any questions. Whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions by putting that into the comment section, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically. Are there any students in Zoom that would like to volunteer to read the chapter 81? Looks like Christine would like to volunteer to read. If you'd like to go ahead, Christine.
Okay. The simile of the tortoise. Monks, in the past, the tortoise was searching for food along the bank of a river on one evening. On that same evening, a jackal was also searching for food along the bank of that same river. When the tortoise saw the jackal in the distance searching for food, it drew its limbs and neck inside its shell and passed the time keeping still and silent. The jackal had also seen the tortoise in the distance, searching for food, so he approached and waited close by, thinking, "When this tortoise extends one or another of its limbs or its neck, I will grab it right on the spot, pull it out and eat it." But because the tortoise did not extend any of its limbs or its neck, the jackal, failing to gain access to it, lost interest in it and departed. So monks, Mara the evil one is constantly and continually waiting close by you, thinking, "Perhaps I will gain access to him through the eye, or through the ear, or through the nose, or through the tongue, or through the body, or through the mind." Therefore, monks, recite guarding the doors of the six sense spaces. having seen a form with the eye, having heard a sound with the ear, having smelled an odor with the nose, having tasted a flavor with the tongue, having touched a physical object with the body, having recognized a mental object with the mind, do not grasp its signs and features, since if you leave the eye sense space unguarded, the ear sense space unguarded, the nose sense space unguarded, the tongue sense space unguarded, the body sense space unguarded, the mind sense space unguarded, the evil, unwholesome states of craving and displeasure might invade you. Practice the way of its restraint. Guard the eye sense space, the ear sense space, the nose sense space, the tongue sense space, the body sense space, the mind sense space. Undertake the restraint of the eye sense space, the ear sense space, the nose sense space, the tongue sense space, the body sense space, and the mind sense space. When, monks, you recite guarding the doors of the 6 sense spaces, Mara, the evil one, failing to gain access to you, will lose interest in you and depart, just as the jackal departed from the tortoise. Drawing in the mind's thoughts, as a tortoise draws its limbs into its shell, independent, not harassing others, fully extinguished, a monk would not blame anyone.
All right. Thank you, Christine. So here, the Buddha is using this simile of the tortoise to represent the 6 sense spaces, because what you're understanding is part of the 10 fetters, or those 10 pollutions, or 10 taints. These are the 10 things that the Buddha discovered that are pollutions in the mind that need to be eliminated in order to get to enlightenment. And one of those is sensual desire. This is a really big one. This is one that a lot of people struggle with, understanding what it is and then also eliminating it. What sensual desire is longing and yearning. The mind is longing and yearning through the sense bases of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself, longing and yearning for agreeable contact. And as long as there's craving, desire, attachment in there, where you have certain things that you want contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, then when you get that agreeable contact, you're going to get pleasant feelings, those conditioned feelings of happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But because there's craving and there's certain things that you find agreeable, there are certain things that you find disagreeable also due to that craving. Because as long as there's a mental longing, strong eagerness, which is the craving, there's going to be agreeable things and disagreeable things. And now if you have agreeable things that the mind wants and it gets that contact, it gets pleasant feelings. But now, because you can't permanently get everything you want, the mind's going to now experience disagreeable contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. And now when you experience that, you're going to experience painful feelings. So this is something that you need to understand as it relates to the entire path to enlightenment, because this is a significant fetter that needs to be eliminated as part of your progression to enlightenment. Because as long as the mind is longing and yearning through the sense bases for agreeable contact and it's repulsed by disagreeable contact, your mind's going to be shaken up. You're going to experience this pleasant feelings, it's going to go up, and then you're going to experience these painful feelings as the mind goes down. But when you extinguish craving, desire, attachment, you won't experience that up and down of your emotions, because you don't have this mental longing and strong eagerness for agreeable contact. So therefore, you won't also experience painful feelings with disagreeable contact. And the way that you accomplish this is through breathing, mindfulness, meditation, generosity, and all the other teachings on the path to enlightenment, to include the Eightfold Path. Well, one of the significant teachings on the Eightfold Path that you need to understand is right mindfulness. Mindfulness is awareness of mind, and having awareness of the mind, and then guarding the doorways to discontentedness. And that's what the Buddha is describing here, is guarding these doorways, guarding these 6 sense bases, that if you know and you can independently verify, and you've seen that discontentedness comes through these 6 sense bases, then you can guard the mind through guarding these 6 sense bases with mindfulness. What mindfulness is awareness of mind, where you can observe what's going on in the mind and be aware of that. More specifically, it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which we're going to be talking about in today's class. But here, let's just talk about mindfulness in general, which is awareness of mind. So if you can be observant of forms that you see with the eyes, and you can know that anything you see is impermanent, anything you hear is impermanent, any odors that you smell is impermanent, any flavors that you taste are impermanent, anything that comes in contact with the body is impermanent, and any mental objects in the mind are impermanent. But the mind might be longing and yearning through these sense spaces, and now when you extend your thoughts or you extend your limbs, now it's easy for you to be tempted to go forward with unwise decisions that's going to produce unwholesome results. And the Buddha is using the story of the tortoise because it has 6 limbs. It has the 2 hands, the 2 legs, it has a head and a tail. There's these 6 limbs that are extended from a tortoise. And as the tortoise is walking near the pond, it can see that there's this jackal that wants to eat it, so it draws in its limbs. Just like in your daily life, you can draw in the mind's thoughts and not allow the mind to go longing and yearning through these sense spaces, because as you do, you're only going to experience discontentedness of one form or another. And the Buddha talks about Mara just here a little bit. Mara is this being that is interested in causing calamity and causing harm in the world. If a Buddha is interested in seeing wholesome things occur in the world by sharing wisdom and helping people get to enlightenment, Mara is just the opposite of that, interested in causing calamity and harmful things in the world. So Mara is going to try to tempt people into making unwise decisions by kind of grabbing at your sense bases and kind of leading you in that direction. But what the Buddha is describing here is that if you draw in your limbs and you have the guard of your mind, you're guarding the mind with mindfulness, Mara will lose interest in you. And what he's referring to is something that we talked about in last week's class, where the Buddha was describing once you get into the jhanas, that your mind is protected from Mara, and you've blindfolded Mara, and Mara will no longer attempt to tempt you, because Mara knows that you've drawn in your limbs and you're no longer tempted in the same ways that you were before when you were off the path. So Mara loses interest in you, as the Buddha is describing here. So it's really important that you guard these doors of the sense spaces, that you become aware and you can see on your own that, yes, when you see agreeable things through the eyes, like agreeable physical forms, you get pleasant feelings. But those feelings don't last, because now when you see disagreeable things through the eyes, you get painful feelings. And the same thing is happening with the ears, the nose, the tongue, the bodily contact in the mind. Because as long as you're not guarding the sense spaces, as long as the mind is unrestrained and you're unaware, then the mind is just extending its limbs, and it's very easy for the mind to indulge in sensual pleasures and getting conditioned feelings. Now, when the mind is enlightened, you're going to experience lots of enjoyment in life. Sometimes when people hear us talk about the sense bases or sensual desire or craving or eliminating pleasant feelings, they might think that an enlightened being doesn't have fun or doesn't enjoy things or isn't having a fulfilling life. This is just the opposite. You're actually enjoying life way more than you ever did in the unenlightened mental state. Because in the unenlightened mental state, the unenlightened mind can only experience happiness if this condition is met, and this condition is met, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. There has to be all these conditions met, and then you will be happy. And if those conditions aren't met, the mind's going to be sad or angry or frustrated or some other painful feeling. With the enlightened mind, you've eliminated all of those conditions, all those expectations, all of those wants and cravings. So your mind can be peaceful and joyful all the time. So while here we're talking about restraining the mind and pulling it back from indulging in those sensual pleasures, what we're describing is to not allow the mind to base its inner feelings on the condition of getting agreeable contact, because then it's only a matter of time before you have disagreeable contact. So if you go out with your friends and you enjoy that, wonderful. Go out with your friends, have a nice night, go out to dinner, go to the movies, do whatever you're going to do. Enjoy your time immensely. but don't cling to it expecting it to be permanent. Don't crave it, because if you do, when the event is over, you're going to miss your friends, you're going to feel lonely, you're going to feel bored. Or if you're having a piece of chocolate cake, one of my famous examples, right? If you're having a piece of chocolate cake, you can know that this piece of chocolate cake is absolutely delicious and you can enjoy it. But don't allow the mind to cling to it, expecting it to be permanent. Because the next time you go to this restaurant, they might not have that chocolate cake. So if you allow the mind to get these conditioned pleasant feelings, which enjoyment isn't one of those, right? Enjoyment is not a conditioned feeling. You can enjoy something without having a conditioned pleasant feeling. Conditioned pleasant feelings are like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, euphoria. This is where the mind bases its inner feelings on some condition. The condition is, I have my chocolate cake, so I'll be happy. When I come to the restaurant and they don't have my chocolate cake, I'm going to be angry. This is what a conditioned feeling is. Or if you're with your friends, based on that condition, you'll be happy. But then when you're not with them, now that that condition has changed, you'll be missing your friends or you'll be lonely, right? So what you would like to do is enjoy the chocolate cake, enjoy your friends, enjoy the things that you do in life, but don't cling to it, longing and yearning for it to be permanent. And by doing that, the way that you accomplish it is you accomplish it by protecting the mind with mindfulness and being aware that where you see the mind moving up into those pleasant feelings and wanting to create conditioned pleasant feelings, you restrain the mind and you pull it back. And where you see the mind trying to go into those painful feelings and basing its inner feelings on something that the mind isn't getting, you restrain the mind, you pull it back, you cut that off, you pull in your limbs, as the Buddha is explaining here. And then lastly, I'll just highlight this one other thing as part of this simile, where the Buddha says a monk would not blame anyone. So if things are happening in your life and whatever is going on in your life, an enlightened being isn't going to blame anybody for things that are happening in their life, because anything that's happening in your life is a result of your decisions. So if you're blaming other people for the certain things that you're experiencing, particularly discontentedness, then your mind still has wrong view. You're not understanding that every single thing that you encounter in life is a result of your decisions. So you wouldn't blame anybody for anything that you're experiencing. If you're experiencing something and you start blaming other people for experiencing this, then your mind doesn't have right view. And if you're blaming other people for what's happening to you, then you are powerless to change anything about your life and what's going on in your life. But if you understand that everything you experience is a result of your decisions, then you can just change the decisions that you make based in wisdom. You can now make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results. But as long as you lack wisdom, you will make unwise decisions that lead to unwholesome results. And when you're experiencing those unwholesome results with a lack of wisdom, you might blame other people for those unwholesome results. But a wise individual who understands the natural law of karma and these natural laws of existence would not blame anyone for anything that's happening in your life, because you understand that everything that transpires is a result of your decisions. So let me see what questions you guys might have on this particular chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. I'll be able to see that and then answer whatever questions that you might have. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions in Facebook or YouTube, and I don't see any in Zoom either. So you guys must be understanding this to a certain degree. We'll move on to the next chapter, which is another simile, which goes hand in hand with the simile that we just discussed. Is there someone in Zoom who would like to read this simile? Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and read this one for you guys. It's titled, The Simile of the Bowl of Oil. Monks, suppose that on hearing, the most beautiful girl of the land, the most beautiful girl of the land, a great crowd of people would assemble. Now that most beautiful girl of the land would dance exquisitely and sing exquisitely. On hearing the most beautiful girl of the land is dancing, the most beautiful girl of the land is singing, an even larger crowd of people would assemble. Then a man would come along, aspiring to live, not aspiring to die, aspiring for peacefulness, uninterested in discontentedness. Someone would say to him, "Good man, you must carry around this bowl of oil, filled to the brim between the crowd and the most beautiful girl of the land. A man with a drawn sword will be following right behind you. And wherever you spill even a little of it, right there, he will cut off your head. What do you think, monks? Would that man stop attending to the bowl of oil and out of negligence turn his attention outwards? No, venerable sir. I have made up this simile, monks, in order to convey a meaning. This here is the meaning. The bowl of oil filled to the brim. This is the designation for mindfulness directed to the body. Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body, make it our vehicle, make it our basis, stabilize it, exercise ourselves in it, and fully perfect it. Thus, monks, should you train yourselves. Monks, those who do not take part in mindfulness directed to the body do not take part in the deathless or enlightenment. Those who take part in mindfulness directed to the body, they take part in the deathless. Monks, those who are unattentive about mindfulness directed to the body are unattentive about the deathless. Those who are attentive about mindfulness directed to the body are attentive about the deathless enlightenment. So here, this simile or this story that the Buddha is describing is he's talking about this most beautiful girl of the land comes together and she actually starts singing and dancing, and she's on one side. And then this larger and larger crowd gathers on the other side. And now this man, this individual, walks with a bowl of oil filled all the way up to the top and is walking right in between them. And if he drops even the slightest amount, there's going to be this individual who chops off his head, right? And he's giving you this analogy, and the Buddha talks in these extremes to help illustrate a point. That if you were in that situation where you were literally walking with this bowl of oil, would you look to that most beautiful girl of the land who is singing and dancing? Or would you look to the crowd who's cheering and gathering and maybe talking and having all kinds of noise coming from them? Or would you just continue to stay intensely focused on this oil filled to the brim of this bowl, ensuring you're not dropping a drop? Well, of course, you're not going to look to either side because you're not interested in getting your head chopped off. And this is what he's describing when it comes to developing mindfulness directed to the body, which mindfulness directed to the body is talking about the bodily sensations associated with the arising of discontentedness. That if you develop right mindfulness, you develop the awareness of the four foundations of mindfulness. So mindfulness directed at the body, the Buddha is describing right mindfulness or awareness of the mind of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. These are the four foundations of mindfulness that you'll need to gather awareness of. And as you gain awareness of those bodily sensations, you'll then be able to cut off and let go of any discontentedness that is arising before it becomes a feeling in the mind. This is key to your ability to getting to enlightenment. Without being able to do this, you wouldn't be able to actually get to enlightenment. So gradually, slowly but surely, you develop the awareness of these four foundations. And you may not be aware of those bodily sensations right now, but if you start cluing in to discontentedness that's arising, whether it's a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a feeling that is neither painful nor pleasant, there's some bodily sensation that is occurring prior to the mind becoming polluted with certain conditioned feelings. So if you can be aware of those bodily sensations, maybe with anger, you might feel the tingling or the heat rising up through the body. You might feel the chest tightening or pressure around the heart. You might feel heat in the face or pressure in the skull. Everybody's a little bit different. And with each individual type of discontentedness, there's going to be a different bodily sensation. So by cluing into that and being able to cut that off and let it go, you're restraining the mind. You're protecting the mind with this mindfulness that the Buddha was talking about in the previous simile, and he's talking about here. So the chapters that we're going to be studying today are about developing this awareness of the bodily sensations. And as you're doing that, you will still experience some conditioned feelings coming into the mind. So this is a gradual process of using breathing mindfulness meditation to gradually develop the ability to be aware of the mind, and in daily life being aware of the mind to the point where you can observe any bodily sensations that are occurring as the mind is starting to become discontent potentially, because you can get way ahead of the curve here and cut off and let go of the discontentedness as just a bodily sensation. Once it becomes anger in the mind, this is really dangerous to you, because now you might become bitter and harsh and aggressive or hostile towards an individual. Your intention, speech, and actions can be affected by your discontentedness that is arising in the mind. So you would like to get to the point where you can restrain the mind and cut off and let go of discontentedness as a bodily sensation. The way that I describe this is that if you were going to take a long journey in a boat, maybe from Canada to the UK, as you are in this boat and out in the middle of the ocean, you would like to prevent the water from ever coming into this boat. Because once the water comes into the boat, you have a real challenge on your hands. You have a real problem to deal with. You've got to get this water out of the boat or you're going to sink. So you would like to prevent the water from ever coming into the boat, and you can sail easily from Canada to the UK. But as long as you keep allowing the water to come into the boat, you're going to have this constant problem on your hands, this constant challenge. So if you can observe the bodily sensations arising and you can cut it off and let it go there, you've just saved yourself all the trouble of the mind becoming angry or frustrated or guilty or shameful or bored or lonely or shy or any of these other discontent feelings. So this is what the Buddha is describing here, is that by attending to developing the mindfulness of the body and these bodily sensations, you will be taking part in the deathless, or this enlightened mental state. It's oftentimes referred to the deathless because once you attain enlightenment and this physical body dies, that isn't considered death. It's just considered final enlightenment, because there is no longer any death. There's no longer going to be birth. There's no longer going to be sickness, aging, and death. But instead, there's a separation of the body and the mind at the time of death for an enlightened being, and we call this final enlightenment. So here he's using the word deathless to refer to enlightenment. By attending and taking part and being attentive to this mindfulness of the bodily sensations, you will then be able to take part in this mental state of enlightenment, because that's what's going to lead you to enlightenment. And the Buddha shares, and I can confirm for you, that somebody who's able to be observant of those bodily sensations and cut them off and let them go easily and readily, you're very close to enlightenment. It's not tomorrow or next week or next month, but in the next few months or the next year, 2 or 3, you're going to be experiencing enlightenment, because each time that discontentedness is arising, you can spot it as a bodily sensation and you can easily cut it off and let it go there. And there you're going to be able to liberate the mind of its cravings to get to the point where eventually you'll no longer experience a rising of discontentedness, because you've eliminated all the cravings, desires, attachments that are producing it. So that's how you accomplish this. And one of the factors on the path is right mindfulness, and developing those 4 foundations of mindfulness to be aware of what those are, and then skillfully applying the teachings with these 4 foundations of mindfulness to cut off and let go of discontentedness. Let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. And I see that Christine, she has her hand up. Are you able to unmute yourself, Christine?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, perfect.
So I'm so aware of all these bodily sensations that sometimes I get really overwhelmed by them, because there are so many, and one second after the other they are constantly changing. Like even when I'm kind of content, then I have an experience that I like, and I realize that at the same time that I'm liking it, I'm already feeling the feelings of fear coming up, of losing them again. And then there's subtle things that make me discontent here and discontent there. And it seems like I'm lost in an ocean of discontentedness, to be honest. The more I start observing it, the more I realize that I'm constantly discontent.
Yeah, that's the way I describe discontentedness in Volume 1. I talk about it as a sea of discontentedness. There's so much discontentedness out there. So what I would encourage you to do is just continue to stay focused on developing your breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity. And more, you'll become aware of the mind in meditation. You'll become aware of it in daily life. And you're slowing down the mind, because as the mind has really intense cravings, it can go from bodily sensations to feelings in like the blink of an eye. But when you're training your mind in meditation and you're slowing the mind down to be able to observe the bodily sensations are separate from the feelings, you get this longer period of time where those bodily sensations are there. You might get 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 or 10 seconds before it becomes a feeling in the mind. So it's giving you a longer period of time to observe that they're there and to be able to cut them off and let them go. So you just need to accumulate more and more benefits of the meditation practice to slow the mind down and get to the point where you can be observant of those bodily sensations and easily let them go. And then taking one thing at a time, and realizing that, yeah, right now, if there's a lot of cravings in the mind, there's going to be a bombardment of discontentedness. But just try to focus on one thing at a time and addressing one craving at a time. If you have pretty significant cravings, like you probably know, there's this little minor craving, it's not such a big deal. Maybe you would like to address that one and eliminate that if it's kind of like low-hanging fruit. But sometimes it's really wise to address the big things that you're really having the most discontentedness around. And when I teach in the group learning program on Sunday, tomorrow and next Sunday, I'm going to be teaching you something above and beyond meditation and generosity that you can do in order to eliminate discontentedness. So if you haven't already learned chapter 12 and 13, it's really important to learn, particularly chapter 13, because there I'm going to be describing this other aspect of your practice that you can develop to eliminate these cravings. And as you start getting rid of them, it actually becomes easier and easier because you start building your confidence and you can see that you're able to let them go. One of the ways that I explain it is if you think about a truck, like a pickup truck, and there's a lot of garbage in the pickup truck, and you've got this cargo net over all this garbage. And this cargo net maybe has 20, 30, 50 different anchor points around the garbage. Well, you're trying to free the mind. You're trying to get rid of this cargo net. And you kind of clip one anchor point of the cargo net. And that kind of loosens the cargo net a little bit. But then you have to cut the other one and cut the other one. And eventually you get so good at cutting these, it's almost like a zipper. It's like rip, 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 rip. And you can rip back all of these cravings because you get really good at identifying the cravings, seeing the bodily sensations that are arising, cutting off and letting go. These are all qualities that you need in order to develop, in order to eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments. And the thing that I'm going to be teaching you in the chapter 13 about developing a plan of how to actively eliminate the individual cravings based on what they are and what you observe. So keep practicing. You're headed in the right direction. It's just that you haven't accumulated enough benefits yet, and you haven't put enough pieces together yet to get to the point where you're eliminating more and more discontentedness. I'm pretty sure you've already seen a significant decrease. But keep doing the things that you're already doing and then adding more things that I'm going to be sharing with you about how to peel back that craving. And just stay dedicated and diligent to it. You're absolutely headed in the right direction. All right, it looks like we have a question here in YouTube. The question is, though I don't have desires, how to deal with the desires or expectations of my family members? So you must still have desires, or else you wouldn't be unenlightened. There's some mental longings and strong eagerness that you have. So there's definitely cravings, desires, attachments there in the mind. If a being doesn't have any cravings, desires, attachments, and they fully cultivated their mind would be experiencing enlightenment. And having experienced enlightenment, you would have full wisdom. So you wouldn't need guidance on how to deal with your family members' desires and expectations, because you would already know how to do that if you were enlightened. So be sure that you be honest and objective with your mind, realizing that you do have cravings, desires, attachments, and you're not a bad person. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just that you need to address those in order to remedy them and eliminate them. And one of the cravings that some people have related to your question is to please your family and wanting your family to maybe be proud of you, or you want to see your mom or your dad happy, or your siblings happy. And oftentimes what happens is your family members are putting their expectations on you or their desires on you, and you feel like you have to fulfill those in order to make them happy. But if you understand that that is conditional happiness, if your family members can only be happy if you do a certain thing, This means they're attached to you. This means that their mind isn't liberated. This means they're having craving, desire, attachment. They're trying to form conditioned pleasant feelings based on what you do. And you will never satisfy that, because they'll have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 expectations, and you will meet those expectations and they'll be happy for a period of time. But then they're going to have more expectations that they're going to pile on top of that. And now you're going to be chasing those and trying to fulfill those. They'll be happy for a period of time, and then their expectations will change. So essentially what the mind's doing in this situation is that cravings, desires, attachments, wants, and expectations of your family, you're adopting those as your own cravings, desires, attachments. Now you're trying to fulfill your craving, desire, attachment to fulfill your family's craving, desire, attachment. So you've got to cut all that out and realize that you can't be responsible for your parents or your family's happiness. Each individual person is responsible for their own wellness. And as long as they're attached to you and putting their expectations on you, you're not going to be able to get to your own peacefulness and joy, and neither are they. So you need to get to the point where you recognize that their cravings, desires, attachments, wants, and expectations are theirs, and you don't adopt those as your own, and you just let that stuff go and don't allow it to come into the mind, and you just maintain your contentedness and your joy. Work on eliminating your cravings, desires, attachments. And that's a lot of work for somebody to eliminate their own cravings, desires, attachments. The last thing that you would be interested in doing is adopting your family's cravings, desires, attachments. So you might need to sit down with mom or dad or brothers and sisters at times when they're calm and maybe they're open-minded, and help them understand that their wants and their expectations and their desires are theirs, and you're not going to fulfill their expectations, that you're never going to meet their expectations. And what you would suggest and advise them to do is to eliminate their expectations of you, because when you meet their expectations, they're going to be happy. But when you don't meet their expectations, they're going to be sad. And because of the universal truth of impermanence, it's not possible for you to always meet their expectations. It's just not possible. And like I said, even if you could, that would only produce happiness in their mind for a temporary period of time. And then they're going to add more expectations on top of that. So you're just going to be chasing and chasing and chasing and chasing with your own cravings, desires, attachments, wants, and expectations. So you just need to clear off the table and understand that that's not your goal, is to meet other people's expectations. And if you're living with people or you're involved in committed relationships with people, this might involve that you need to sit down and talk with these people and help them understand. If you're in a relationship that you're not really committed to and you'd rather just move on, you can move on, but you moving on isn't going to produce the contentedness in the mind. You need to train your mind to not adopt other people's expectations. And there's ways that you can talk to people and help them understand that you're not going to do that. You can do that in a kind of formal sit down and talk with them, or you can do it as they're sharing things with you. Like in your day, if you just have an acquaintance that's like, I want you to come pick me up at 10 o'clock. You might say, well, I'm going to come to your house, but, you shouldn't expect me to be there at 10 because you never know what might be happening. I might get there earlier, I might get there later, but if you expect me to be there at 10, I'm just not going to come, because it's unwise for you to have that expectation, because you're going to be angry if I don't meet your expectation. And then your friend might be like, all right, well, just come whenever you would like to come. It's up to you. Oh, perfect. Then I'll come. I'll shoot for around 10 o'clock. I might be earlier, I might be later. But as long as you're not disappointed and upset if I don't show up at exactly 10 o'clock, then sure, I'll come see you, right? These are the ways you can kind of help somebody understand without having kind of a formal sit down. So let's see if we have any questions in Facebook. We don't see any there, and I don't see any in Zoom either. So wonderful questions, guys. Let's go on to the next chapter. And if there's someone who would like to read this, it's a very short one. So those of you guys in Zoom, maybe this is an opportunity for you to break through any shyness if you're able, or if you're interested. This is a good test for the mind. All right, Christine's not shy. Go for it, Christine.
Great good of mindfulness directed to the body. Monks, those who do not take part in mindfulness directed to the body do not take part in the deathless enlightenment. Those who take part in mindfulness directed to the body take part in the deathless enlightenment. Monks, Those who are unattentive about mindfulness directed at the body are unattentive about the enlightenment. Those who are attentive about mindfulness directed at the body are attentive about the deathless enlightenment.
Okay, thank you, Christine. This was the ending of the very last chapter that we just discussed. And I already shared with you there that the Buddha's helping you to see, to develop the awareness of these bodily sensations. This is part of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And you'll find details that I've taught this in Volume 1, Chapter 5, under the subsection Right Mindfulness. If you look there, I explain each one of these 4 foundations of mindfulness and what they are. And you cultivate these in your meditation, and you also cultivate them in daily life, understanding the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. And if you're not aware of this currently, or if you haven't been aware of it, start paying attention that there's these bodily sensations that are occurring prior to the mind experiencing feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, or anger, sadness, frustration, or even shyness or displeasure in the mind. There's some bodily sensation that's occurring, and then there's going to be a feeling that comes into the mind. And you would like to be able to cut it off as a bodily sensation. But of course, your mind isn't fully trained yet, so you're going to experience these conditioned feelings. So try to cut it off and let it go there. Because if you don't, it's going to affect the condition of your mind. Have you ever been angry for a couple of hours or a couple of days or maybe a week or so? I'm sure you have. We all have at some point, right? So that's because you didn't catch it as a bodily sensation. You didn't catch it as a feeling, and it now affected the condition of your mind, and you're now angry for a week or two. Who enjoys that? That's not fun, right? So cut that out by getting ahead of the curve and cutting off the bodily sensations. Because then, in this example, if you allow the mind to go through those bodily sensations, the feelings, affect the condition of the mind, it's going to form this mental object, which is a deeply rooted container in the mind that is much harder to uproot. And those 10 fetters that the Buddha describes, those are 10 mental objects that are in the mind that need to be uprooted out of the mind. And what you're doing is you're trying to put this dam on those bodily sensations. You're trying to block the discontent feelings by cutting off and letting go at the bodily sensations, so you're no longer feeding these mental objects. And all the while, you're using other teachings of the Buddha to break up these mental objects so you can uproot them and get them out of the mind. And this is what's going to ultimately purify the mind and get you to enlightenment, where you can again experience the brightness and the radiance and the joy and the peacefulness and calmness of the enlightened mind. As long as these mental objects are being fed and are continuing to grow and be rooted in the mind, your mind is polluted and you're not going to be able to experience the brightness and radiance of the enlightened mind. So if you can cut off and let go at the bodily sensations, and of course sometimes there's going to be feelings, but more and more cut off and let go at the bodily sensations, now you can more readily work on uprooting these mental objects, and that's where you're going to experience the peace and joy as you're purifying the mind more and more. Are there any questions on this particular chapter? Christine has a question. What's your question, Christine?
Yeah, thank you. I think I already asked a Facebook post about that, but maybe it's easier for you to answer it here because it suits the topic. I don't fully understand how to cut off the bodily sensation already. I understand how to turn around the mind and realize that I have the craving for this or for that. And sometimes it eliminates the bodily sensations, but not always. Mm-hmm. I understand that I could just turn around and do something else, or I could intentionally relax the body, but somehow it keeps coming back.
Yeah. So some of these cravings are deeply rooted in the mind. And by the way, I saw that post, and I'll definitely reply there to help you and help others through reading that. But let me help you here, is that some of these cravings are deeply rooted in the mind, and they're really challenging to get rid of. You can't just cut it off once and then the craving's gone and the discontentedness is gone. You're oftentimes having to skillfully work with the same craving many, 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 many times. It's like jackhammering and gradually breaking this up. So what you're doing is you're trying to accumulate enough benefits in your meditation and in your daily life that you're able to more and more easily cut off and let go of these bodily sensations. But as you're in the transition of doing that, you're going to need to do things like redirect the mind. So like, let's just say, I don't know, let me say you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off, and then you feel these bodily sensations where you're starting to get frustrated. And normally what you would do once your mind's more fully trained is you'd be able to just cut that off and let it go, no big deal. Like you could just internally in the mind cut it off. Just like where in meditation your mind moves off the breath, you're able to let that thought go and come back to the breath. That's what you're trying to do. That same exact thing where you let go of the thought and come back to the breath in meditation. That's what you're doing in daily life. And you'll get better and better at that as you accumulate more and more benefits of the training in meditation. But in the meantime, some things that you can do is you can redirect the mind. So say somebody cuts you off in traffic and now boom, they're like right in front of you. Maybe what you do is you change lanes, so now you're not looking at this person's bumper anymore, right? And like you feel the frustration bubbling up inside of you. So you can just change lanes and kind of redirect the mind. This would help you. Or if you're sitting at a traffic light, maybe you look at the sky or the clouds, or maybe you can close your eyes for a little bit and focus on the breath for a couple of breaths. This will redirect the mind. And more you'll get better at not needing to do those things, because internally you can cut off and let go of the arising discontentedness. But in the meantime, you might need to do some of these things to redirect the mind in daily life or things like that. And each situation is going to be a little bit different, but you're looking for something to redirect the mind. Whereas if you're looking at this person's bumper in this example, maybe the frustration keeps bubbling up. Or if you have other examples of certain situations where you're having cravings and you're noticing the bodily sensations, but you don't know how to redirect the mind, you can share that example with me and I'll help you understand how to redirect the mind to maybe something else. But maybe you can see that for yourself by just what I'm sharing with you here.
Yeah, I think this was very helpful already, because it stopped my mind trying to figure out if there's something that I haven't understood. So it's basically just about practicing. And one example that I find particularly difficult is when I'm around people, especially when it's for business purpose, and I notice that I'm always tensing up. And when I notice it, I intentionally relax the body and remind myself that it's not important what people think about me. But the moment I focus on interaction again, it's back. I could play this game for hours, basically, of letting the tension go, and I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, the reason why it's back is because you still have that mental object of personal existence view. These mental objects are deeply rooted in the mind. You can't just cut them off and let it go once and then it's going to be gone. So what you're describing is that you're worried about how people think of you in a social setting. So when you see the bodily sensations arising, you cut it off and let it go. But then when you interact, it comes right back. And the reason why is because you haven't cut it off and let it go enough. You haven't completely uprooted the personal existence view, because this mental object is deeply rooted in the mind. So each time you do cut it off and let it go, it's like clearing out a little bit of this personal existence view. So that's really helpful for you. So you're going to need to interact like this on multiple occasions to get to the point where each time you cut it off and let it go, and sure, it's coming back, but eventually it won't come back as strong. It'll be lesser and lesser. You'll spot it sooner and sooner, and you'll be more and more easily able to cut it off and let it go. One of the challenges on this path is you'll get to the point where you have wisdom of the path and certain aspects of the path. Like right now, you have the wisdom to be attentive to the bodily sensations, and when they arise, to cut it off and let it go. You know that to be true, and you see the wisdom in it. But the mind just can't do it yet 100% of the time. And this is where the mind sometimes struggles. It's like, you know what you're supposed to do, but the mind just can't do it 100% of the time because it hasn't had enough training yet. You need to accumulate enough benefits of the training to get to the point where you can easily do it. So this is where the Buddha and I talk about having determination, dedication, and diligence. You need to stick with it. You know what the right thing to do. You know what the path is in certain aspects of the path, but you just haven't accumulated enough benefits through the meditation and through practicing the Eightfold Path in daily life that you're able to easily cut it off and let it go every single situation. And some of these fetters that you're now starting to eliminate, they're deeply rooted in the mind, and it's going to take you multiple times of cutting it off and letting it go before it's fully extinguished from the mind. So what you're describing is you're doing this exactly the way I would recommend. You just need to keep doing it and accumulating more and more of the benefits. All right, let me check in here. We have a question on YouTube. The question is, feelings happen very quickly. How to know and deal with them on time? So yes, if your mind is untrained and you haven't been doing breathing mindfulness meditation, those feelings are going to come really quick, particularly if you have really strong cravings, desires, attachments. The feelings are going to come up in the mind really quick. But if you slow the mind down with breathing mindfulness meditation, if you build up to 2 or 3 sessions per day for 30 minutes or more, this will slow things down, where you'll experience bodily sensations for sometimes upwards of 8 to 10 seconds before it becomes a feeling in the mind. So it gives you a lot of time to be observant of the bodily sensations and gives you a lot of time to cut it off and let it go. But if you have a really strong craving, you can go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in like the blink of an eye, and the mind can become angered and frustrated really, really quickly. But if you're dedicated and diligent to your breathing mindfulness meditation practice and practicing generosity, you'll be able to slow the mind down in meditation, but then also maintain that in daily life as you're going out and about and doing all the various things that you need to do. But if you don't have that well-developed meditation practice, the feelings are going to come very quickly. So be sure that you're working to develop your meditation practice, but also working with generosity to train the mind to let go of craving, desire, attachment. Generosity is so very, very key. It tends to be a very hard thing for people to practice, but you need to get to the point where you're sharing your time, effort, energy, and resources more than is strictly required in any given situation, because this is going to train the mind to let go, along with the breathing mindfulness meditation, the way that I teach it, to cut off the thoughts and let go. Depending on where you learn breathing mindfulness meditation, some people teach you to observe the thoughts. This isn't what you're interested in doing. Or some people teach you to label the thoughts in meditation. You're not interested in doing this. This isn't what the Buddha taught. As soon as you notice the mind moves off the breath, cut it off and let it go. And this is what will gain the discipline and the control of the mind, so that you can now not only do that in meditation, but you can do it in daily life as well. We have another question coming in on YouTube. It says, what does it mean to be deathless? So this is how the Buddha sometimes refers to enlightenment, because during this life, you can attain enlightenment and you'll enjoy the peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness for the rest of your life. Whether that's 30 years or 40 years or 50 years or what have you, you'll experience that peace and joy. The mental state of enlightenment is permanent. And then once you die, or once this body dies, you've come to the end of this life, if the mind is enlightened, you've been experiencing the deathless element, or the deathless state, which is what the Buddha is describing here. And the reason why it's called the deathless is because at the time of the end of this life, for an enlightened being, you're not experiencing death. What you're experiencing is you're experiencing the separation of the body and the mind. Because when you get to enlightenment in this life, your mind will no longer experience any mental anguish whatsoever. You won't experience any kind of discontent feelings like we talk about, the anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, shyness, boredom, loneliness, and all these other discontent feelings are eliminated. But when you're enlightened, in your living out the remaining part of this life, you will still experience physical pain. It won't be intense the way it is in the unenlightened state, but you'll still know that the body is experiencing pain. And this is helpful. This is important. You need this. Because as an enlightened being, for example, if you were standing too close to a fire, you need to know, like, oh my goodness, that part of my body is really hot. Let me make a decision to move away from this fire. And now you'll experience that sensation of the pain from the fire, but you won't experience the mental anguish associated with the physical pain, because now the mind is enlightened. In the unenlightened state, you'll experience the physical pain and the mental anguish along with it, which intensifies the physical pain. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you're only experiencing the physical pain, and it's very muted. You won't experience the mental anguish. So at the time of death, this is final enlightenment, because the body and the mind separate. You can't extinguish that particular aspect of life as long as you're in existence. You can't extinguish eliminating the connection of the body and the mind together until the end of this life. And when that occurs, it's the separation of the body and the mind. We call it final enlightenment rather than death, because an enlightened being is no longer going to experience birth, sickness, aging, and death. They've already escaped the cycle of rebirth. As an enlightened being, you're outside of the cycle of rebirth, so you're no longer experiencing birth and death. So by the time you get to enlightenment, you're outside of the cycle of rebirth. When there's the end of this life, you're no longer experiencing death, you're experiencing final enlightenment or final nibbana. So that's why the Buddha calls it the deathless, because if you're outside of the cycle of rebirth as an enlightened being, you're no longer experiencing death. Here's another question on YouTube. Where does the mind go after separation? This all depends if the being is unenlightened or if they're enlightened. If they're unenlightened, there's a period of time where the mind is not in existence, in terms of there is no physical form, there is no existence in one of the 5 realms. The mind is still in the cycle of rebirth, but it's not in existence and within one of the 5 realms. And then there can be a period of time, I've seen as long as 500 to 2,000 years between lives, where there isn't existence. So the mind can be not in existence within the individual realms for upwards of that amount of time before you take on a new existence. And the Buddha talks about these in his various teachings. It's based on the cosmology that existed during that lifetime. If you look at volume 11 of the book series, you'll see all the different things there. So in the unenlightened state, the mind is just kind of in limbo, so to speak, waiting to be reborn. And then once there's rebirth, there's a new existence in either the hell, animal, afflicted spirits, the human realm, or the heavenly realm. If the mind is enlightened and there's a separation between the body and the mind, the Buddha doesn't describe what happens next. He leaves this as an undeclared teaching, so he doesn't declare what is actually going to occur next for a being who gets to enlightenment. He just talks about you're not going to experience rebirth in the cycle of rebirth, but he doesn't share if there is something next or there isn't something next. Great questions, everyone. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. Thank you for those questions. Let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 84. Is there someone in Zoom that would like to read this chapter? There we go. Christine, go for it.
Training a mind filled with loving kindness without hostility or ill will. Monks, there are these 5 courses of speech that others may use when they address you. Their speech may be timely or untimely. Number 2, true or untrue. Number 3, gentle or harsh. Number 4, connected with benefit or unbeneficial. 5, spoken with a mind of loving kindness or with inner hate. Herein, monks, you should train thus. Our mind will remain unaffected, and we shall speak no evil words. We shall recite compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall recite enveloping that person with a mind filled with loving kindness. And starting with him, we shall recite enveloping the all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, joyful, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train monks. Monks, suppose a man came with crimson, I don't know that, sorry about pronunciation, turmeric, indigo, or carmine, and said, I shall draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space. What do you think, monks? Could that man draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space? No, venerable sir. Why is that? Because empty space is formless and invisible. He cannot possibly draw pictures there or make pictures appear there. Eventually, a man would reap only tiredness and disappointment. So too, monks, These are the 5 courses of speech that others may use when they address you. Herein, monks, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall speak no evil words. We shall recite compassionate for their welfare, and a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall recite enveloping them with a mind filled with loving kindness. And starting with them, we shall recite enveloping all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, joy, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That's how you should train monks. The Buddha also speaks several other similes. A simile of a man who came with a hoe and a basket and said, I shall make this great earth to be without earth. A simile of a man with blazing grass torch and said, I shall heat up and burn away the river Ganges with this blazing grass torch. Eventually, that man would reap only tiredness and disappointment. Monks, even if criminals were to sever you savagely limb by limb with a 2-handed saw, he who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be practicing my teachings. Herein, monks, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall speak no evil words. We shall recite compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall recite enveloping them with a mind filled with loving kindness. And starting with them, we shall recite enveloping the all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, joy, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train monks. Monks, if you keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind, do you see any course of speech, insignificant or significant, that you could not endure? No, venerable sir. Therefore, monks, you should keep this advice and the simile of the saw constantly in mind. That will lead your welfare and peacefulness for a long time.
Okay, thank you, Christine. So here, the Buddha is sharing a bunch of different things. He's talking, of course, about training your mind to be filled with loving kindness and without hostility or ill will. Loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, having active goodwill. And we train our mind to do that in meditation, through loving kindness meditation, and then we practice in daily life through our intention, speech, and actions to be loving and kind. This is how you fully transform your mind away from anger, hatred, and ill will, along with the bitterness, hostility, aggression, and harshness, and things like this. And he also trains, as part of right speech, the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, that we should speak at the right time, what we say is true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. And here, if you speak in that way, you'll see that your relationships will really blossom. Because even though you have all the best intentions in the world, if you're speaking at the wrong time, if what you say is untrue, harsh, unbeneficial, or with a mind of inner hate, you'll find that your relationships will really struggle. So even though you're aspiring to practice more and more to get to the point where you're practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, what you should understand is that there are going to be people that will talk to you in ways that aren't the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. Now, someday in the entire world, if we were all enlightened everywhere in the world, which will take many generations for that to occur, then people will be speaking with the 5 factors of well-spoken speech at all times. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where we've got way more unenlightened beings than we have enlightened beings. So therefore, as you go about the world, you're going to have people that are going to speak to you harsh sometimes, or they're going to speak to you hateful sometimes. And what the Buddha is saying, and he's sharing, and he's guiding you and encouraging you to do, is to remain unaffected, so that as you're going about the world and people are speaking to you maybe in impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful ways, that you train your mind to the point where you remain unaffected by that type of speech. And the way that you do that is you eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments, where you no longer crave and desire and long and yearn for people to talk to you in a specific way. Because as long as you do, you're going to experience this discontentedness. Because when people are hateful or they're vindictive or they're harsh, you're going to feel affected by that. But if you can eliminate your craving, desire, attachment and reside unaffected, you might just smile when somebody's talking aggressive and harsh. You might ignore it. You might choose to walk away. But what you're not interested in doing is being argumentative and harsh and aggressive back. Because by you doing that, it's just going to keep you stuck in the cycle of continuous discontentedness. If somebody's argumentative with you, if you're argumentative back, it's just going to continue to escalate and make more and more problems in your life. So it's better to remain quiet, to walk away, to ignore it, or what have you. If you have an individual who's repeatedly harsh and aggressive with you, you might choose to move on from the relationship and no longer conduct yourself in the relationship. Or if it's a brand new relationship and somebody's already being harsh and aggressive with you, you might not choose to even go forward with the relationship. But there's some relationships, maybe mom or dad or brothers or sisters or other people like this, that you're really committed to, and they are maybe harsh and aggressive with you at different times, but in these relationships, you're not interested to eliminate the relationship, but you would like to clean it up. And as long as you're harsh and aggressive back, mom and dad are going to continue to be harsh and aggressive with you, or brothers and sisters or other people. So you need to train your mind to be unaffective and make sure that you speak no evil words. As long as you keep doing that, then people are going to be speaking that way with you. So you need to arise this compassion for the welfare of other beings, and you need to develop this mind of loving kindness so that you now envelop this person and your mind is filled with loving kindness, that maybe you have concern for this person's misfortune if you see them being aggressive and hostile in their speech, where in the past you might have been argumentative and bitter and harsh and hostile with them back. Now you're choosing not to do that. You're choosing to be calm and peaceful, and that is what will extinguish your unwise decisions in the past where you were argumentative and you were hostile. Because as long as you continue to be argumentative and hostile, those people are going to continue to be that way with you. And the Buddha gives you this analogy down here to help you understand this in more detail, where he talks about if there were criminals who had essentially kidnapped you and they were savagely sawing you limb by limb, essentially sawing you at your wrist, in your elbow, in your shoulder, in your ankle, in your knee, in your hip. If they were sawing you limb by limb by limb like this, he's saying if you have hate in your mind at that time, you're not practicing his teachings. Because by the time that you get to enlightenment, it's impossible for your mind to experience any kind of anger or hate towards others, even if somebody was sawing you limb by limb by limb. But of course, right now, you might see that as very hard, or even hard to not only do, but hard to even fathom being able to do that. But when you train your mind to the point where you've eliminated craving, anger, and ignorance, you can get to the point, no matter what people are doing around you, you don't have inner hate towards them. It doesn't mean that you stay there and allow them to do these things to you, but the Buddha's just describing that if these things occurred, that you wouldn't have hate in your mind. And now understanding that, and he's encouraging you and guiding you to have loving kindness for all beings, even in a situation like this, he says, okay, if you were having this speech directed towards you, either significant or insignificant, is there any kind of speech that you couldn't endure? If you can endure these criminals sawing you from limb to limb to limb to limb to limb, what about this harsh speech? What about this unbeneficial speech? What about this hateful speech or aggressive speech? Can you endure that? Well, sure, right? If you can train your mind to the point and kind of think about if somebody was sawing you from limb to limb to limb, you wouldn't have hate, then you can get to the same point when somebody's speaking harsh and aggressive or hostile. Get your mind to the point where you've trained it so well that when other people are acting unkind and impolite, that you don't hate them. Because that's what craving, desire, attachment is going to produce, is that when people are harsh and aggressive and hostile with you, you're going to hate them back. But that's not what you're interested in doing. You're trying to rewire the mind, get rid of this craving for everybody to function a certain way, so that when people are bitter and harsh and aggressive with you, you can maintain your contentedness and your peacefulness and your joy, but also you continue to have loving kindness for these beings. You continue to have compassion for these beings, which is concern for their misfortune. Because if someone's being bitter and harsh and aggressive with you, that's because they have craving, anger, and ignorance in their mind, unknowing of true reality. And you can just have concern for their misfortune, that it's unfortunate that they haven't been able to come across these teachings and train their mind in such a way that they're not bitter and harsh and aggressive towards you. And if you can just think about compassion and concern for their misfortune rather than being hateful back, it will help you to arise this loving kindness and compassion in the mind. Let me see what questions you guys have on this chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be able to see that. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in any of our platforms, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next chapter. Is there someone in Zoom who would like to read this one? Okay, I'll go ahead and read this one. It's titled Benefits of Developing Various Kinds of Meditation. Rahula, develop meditation on loving kindness. For when you develop meditation on loving kindness, any ill will be abandoned. Rahula, develop and cultivate the mind on compassion. For when you develop and cultivate the mind on compassion, any cruelty will be abandoned. Rahula, develop and cultivate the mind on sympathetic joy. For when you develop and cultivate the mind on sympathetic joy, any jealousy will be abandoned. Rahula, develop and cultivate the mind on equanimity. For when you develop and cultivate the mind on equanimity, any aversion will be abandoned. Rahula, develop meditation on unattractiveness of the body. For when you develop meditation on unattractiveness of the body, any lust will be abandoned. Rahula, develop meditation on the perception of impermanence. For when you develop meditation on the perception of impermanence, the conceit I am will be abandoned. Okay, so what the Buddha is referring to here in this first section, these first 4 aspects that he's teaching, these are referred to as the Brahma Viharas. A lot of times during the life of the Buddha and afterwards, people look to the Buddha as almost like a doctor, where there are certain symptoms that you're experiencing in the mind, and he's providing the antidote or the solution or the remedy. And here you can see that very clearly of why people think that way. That if you're experiencing anger, hatred, or ill will, in those lesser versions like frustration, irritation, annoyance, even the slightest dislike of another being, the antidote to that, the solution to that is loving kindness. And you can cultivate that in meditation, and then you can practice it in daily life through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. And this is what will transform your mind away from the anger, hatred, and ill will towards other beings. Here, the Buddha is describing compassion as the antidote for this cruelty. Because if you're cruel to other beings, the opposite of that is compassion, where you have concern for their misfortune. And you can cultivate these as part of your meditation and your daily life. As you see the anger, hatred, ill will, or the cruelty arising, then you bring in the loving kindness, which is this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. Or you see the cruelty or indifference in the mind, then you bring in this concern for the misfortune of others. Sympathetic joy is the remedy for jealousy or envy. What sympathetic joy is joy for others' success, even if you didn't contribute to it. So where you see the mind becoming jealous about somebody has a new house, or they got a promotion at work, or they got more money, or they got a new boyfriend or girlfriend, even though these are things that you might want yourself, you would like to arise this sympathetic joy where you have joy for their success, even though you didn't contribute to it. And even though you don't feel it, maybe when this is occurring, you would like to arise this in the mind so that you can get to the point where you just have joy. You don't allow this jealousy or envy to come into the mind. Then there's this aversion, which is remedied, according to the Buddha, by this equanimity. And you can see this to be true in your own practice, because what aversion is when you have a craving in your mind and you want things to be a certain way, you don't get it, and now you experience these painful feelings. You falsely attribute these painful feelings to this person or this situation. So now you have aversion where you push that person or you push the situation out of your life. Your mind is uncalm, it's shaken up, and you think that that's going to solve the problem by pushing this person out of your life. And it doesn't solve the actual problem. But what equanimity is remaining calm and composed, having evenness of temper, even in difficult situations. So when you're in difficult situations and you experience the mind being shaken up, you need to cut that off and let it go and bring in the calmness, this equanimity. And this will help you to eliminate aversion where you're pushing people away and pushing situations away, because that doesn't actually solve the problem. As long as you keep allowing the mind to push people away or push situations away, it's only a matter of time before you get angry or hostile or aggressive or shaken up about something else, because you haven't solved the root problem, which is the craving, desire, attachment. So by you remaining with equanimity, calmness, and composure, you're restraining the mind and you're pulling it back. When the mind wants to have those painful feelings and it wants to push things away, you maintain your calmness and composure. Then there's this unattractiveness of the body to abandon lust or eliminate lust. This is craving for sexual contact. The reason why we have craving or lust for sexual contact is because we don't see the body as it truly is. We see the hair is made up in a certain way. We see the certain clothing, certain jewelry. We put certain scents on the body in order to make it more attractive. We have all these different things that we do to the body in order to make it more attractive and appealing for somebody to be interested in this body and to have sex with us, because of our central desire that we want to have sex perhaps. So we try to do these things to the body to make it more attractive so that somebody would be willing to do that with you. But if you see the body as it truly is and you develop the unattractiveness of the body, you can either reduce or eliminate your sexual cravings and your lust. And there's meditation that you can accomplish that, to be able to do that. And I share that in Volume 1, Chapter 11. Then there's this meditation to develop the perception of impermanence and eradicate the conceit I am. This is related to deeply soaking in the mind the universal truth of impermanence and eliminating personal existence view, which is part of the ego, and also that fetter of conceit. Because as long as the mind is holding on to this I am, you will continue to be discontent. So for example, if I thought I am an American, when I hear people say agreeable things about Americans, then your mind's going to get pleasant feelings. But when people say disagreeable things that are disparaging and degrading about American people, if you cling to the perception of I am American, now when you hear that, you are American. If I am American and they're talking about Americans, now you're going to get frustrated or irritated. But if you can develop the perception of impermanence and realize that this self-image and the self-identity is impermanent and it doesn't define who you are, then you can get to liberation, where you don't get these conditioned feelings based on agreeable or disagreeable contact about this self-image or self-identity. So I know that this body was born in America, but I am not American. I don't identify with I am American, because I does not exist. There is no I here. So as long as the mind holds on and clings to the perception that this self-image or this identity is who you are, you're going to experience discontentedness associated with this I am. I am a doctor. I am a lawyer. I am a Buddhist teacher. I am American. I am a boyfriend. I am a girlfriend. Anytime you have a disagreeable contact or agreeable contact on these things, you're going to get shaken up because of it. And there, when your mind is shaken up, you're not going to be able to make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results. So what questions do you guys have on these? Either loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, developing the unattractiveness of the body, and developing the perception of impermanence. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll see your question. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here, so let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 86. So I'll just keep reading until somebody in Zoom maybe volunteers to read a chapter. So this one is titled, One Who is Capable of Entering and Residing in Right Concentration. Monks, possessing 5 qualities, a monk is incapable of entering and residing in right concentration. What 5? Here, a monk cannot patiently endure forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and physical objects. Possessing these 5 qualities, a monk is incapable of entering and residing in right concentration. Monks, possessing 5 other qualities, a monk is capable of entering and residing in right concentration. What 5? Here, a monk patiently endures forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and physical objects. Possessing these 5 qualities, a monk is capable of entering and residing in right concentration. So here, what the Buddha is describing is getting into the jhanas. There's 4 preliminary phases that the mind experiences prior to moving into the first stage of enlightenment. And then there's 4 stages of enlightenment until the mind's actually enlightened as an arahant. Well, if you look at right concentration on the Eightfold Path, the Buddha describes the jhanas and the qualities of these jhanas. As you're putting together the various parts of the Eightfold Path and you're training your mind on the Eightfold Path, you'll start experiencing these qualities of mind. You'll experience all the things that he's describing, and you can see how the mind's moving through these 4 phases that the mind experiences as part of these jhanas. And then once you're in that first stage of enlightenment, from there the mind won't regress out of that. But as long as your mind's in the 4 phases that we refer to as the jhanas, the mind can still regress. If you gave up on your practice or you weren't diligent and dedicated, your mind can actually regress out of that. So you're interested in getting into these 4 jhanas, but you're interested in moving beyond them and getting to the first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment. So the Buddha is describing here that if you cannot patiently endure contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body, which are enduring the physical forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and physical objects, that you can't get into these jhanas. So as you're working to eliminate sensual desire and you're starting to knock down your craving, you'll be able to endure and patiently endure certain forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and physical objects that you either agree with or disagree with. But if you can't patiently endure them, that means you're getting frustrated and irritated. You might become aggressive and hostile and unskillful with your conduct because you can't patiently endure these things. Maybe you're in a car and somebody pulls up next to you with music that you don't like and you're getting all bent out of shape because of it. Or if you're at home and someone's playing loud music and you don't like it and you start getting all bent out of shape because of it, you're not patiently enduring forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and physical objects. So your mind, as it's transitioning into these jhanas and into these stages of enlightenment, you'll go from being visibly shaken up and irritated and annoyed by certain contact through the sense bases to this period of time where you're kind of quietly frustrated. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here, is being patiently enduring these things. And then you get to the point where as you move through the stages of enlightenment where you eliminate sensual desire and your mind can remain completely peaceful and joyful regardless of what's going on around you. And in order to experience that, you need to go through this transitioning. And he's describing a bit of that transition here, where you go from, again, being shaken up by the easiest little sound or different odors or flavors or things, to now you're being able to patiently endure them, where you're not overtly aggressive and hostile, but you might just be quietly irritated when things happening that you don't like. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't even have that slightest dislike when you're experiencing certain things in the world. What questions do you guys have on this chapter? Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions on this chapter. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, which is chapter 87. Do concentration in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening. Monks, possessing 3 factors, a shopkeeper is capable of acquiring wealth not yet acquired, and of increasing wealth already acquired. What 3? Here, a shopkeeper diligently applies himself to his work in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening. Possessing these 3 factors, a shopkeeper is capable of acquiring wealth not yet acquired, and of increasing wealth already acquired. So too, possessing 3 factors, a monk is capable of achieving a wholesome state not yet attained, and of increasing a wholesome state already attained. What 3? Here, a monk diligently applies himself to an object of concentration in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening. Possessing these 3 factors, a monk is capable of achieving a wholesome state not yet attained, and of increasing a wholesome state already attained. Okay, so let me help you understand what the Buddha is describing here. What he's describing is your meditation practice. The Buddha meditated morning, midday, and evening. And this is the ideal way for you to develop your meditation practice, that you're meditating 2 or 3 times a day for 30 minutes or more. That's where you'll see the most benefits. But of course, you need to gradually build up to that. The frequency is actually more important than the duration. So if it's up to doing 1 session for 30 minutes or doing 2 for 15, go for the 2 for 15. You'll see more success with that. Because if you meditate in this type of frequency, there's not a whole lot that is going to go wrong throughout your day because you're being attentive to the mind in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening. And there's only maybe 4-6 hours in between each of those that something could potentially happen in the day. So by building up your meditation practice, even to 2 sessions per day, you're going to see significant improvements. And the Buddha here is helping you with this analogy of a shopkeeper, because you might understand improving wealth and acquiring wealth, that if you were a shopkeeper, you would need to diligently apply yourself to work in the morning, the middle of the day, and the evening, and this is going to grow your business and make it more and more successful. Well, it's the same thing with your meditation practice and with training your mind. If you would like to be attentive to the mind and develop it and cultivate the jhanas and the stages of enlightenment, you're going to need to be attentive to the mind, morning, midday, and evening, meditating. The focus of concentration that he's talking about is the breath and breathing mindfulness meditation. And then in daily life, that you stay attentive to the mind, that where you see the mind having unwholesome thoughts, you cut that off and let it go. And where there's wholesome thoughts, you support those, encourage those, and don't allow them to fade. And this is how you attend to the mind, not only in meditation, morning, midday, and evening, but also in your daily life, that you're always attentive to the mind. It's essentially a full-time job to get to enlightenment. But once you get to enlightenment, you're able to practice the teachings effortlessly. As you're getting started and as you're making your way to enlightenment, there's challenges, right? There's some struggles and difficulties. It's not easy, but it's not difficult either. But it's absolutely worth it as you progress closer and closer to enlightenment to get to that peace and joy that you experience in the enlightened mental state. So let me see what questions you guys have here about the Buddha sharing to do meditation morning, midday, and evening. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions on any of our platforms. So I'll go ahead and move to the next chapter, which is chapter 88. Here, this one's titled, Remote Lodgings in Forest, in Jungle Groves are Hard to Endure. Venerable Sir, I wish to retreat to remote lodgings in forests and jungle groves. Remote lodgings in forests and jungle groves are hard to endure. Student, solitude is hard to undertake and hard to delight in. When he is alone, the woods steal the mind of a monk who does not gain concentration. It can be predicted that one who says, I do not gain concentration, yet I will retreat to remote lodgings in forest and jungle groves, will either sink or float away. Suppose, student, there was a large lake and a bull elephant 7 or 8 cubits in size would come along. He might think, let me enter this lake and playfully wash my ears and back. I will bathe and drink, come out and set off wherever I want. He then enters the lake and playfully washes his ears and back. He bathes and drinks, comes out and sets off wherever he wants. How so? Because his large body finds a footing in the depths. Then a hare or a cat comes along. It might think, how is a bull elephant different from myself? I'll enter this lake and playfully wash my ears and back. I will bathe and drink, come out and set off wherever I want. Then, without reflecting, it hastily enters the deep lake. It can be predicted that it will either sink or float away. Why so? Because its small body does not find a footing in the depths. So too, it can be predicted that when one who would say, I do not gain concentration, yet I will retreat to remote lodgings in forest and jungle groves, will either sink or float away. Come, student, reside within the community. While you reside within the community, you will be at ease. Okay, so what the Buddha is describing here is this elephant who is aware of himself and understands that he can enter into this lake and he can wash and he can drink and he can do whatever he likes because he's got this big, strong, firm body and he can get a footing in the lake. But then there's this hare or this cat, like a rabbit or a cat, that comes along and doesn't reflect and doesn't realize where they are and who they are and what they actually have. And they enter into the lake and they're wished away due to not having reflected. And the Buddha is describing this in the same thing for a student, that you need to understand your practice. You need to understand where you are. That if you're just starting out, then you're going to have certain challenges and certain struggles and difficulties, and you're not necessarily interested in challenging the mind or testing the mind in significant ways because you're still getting your feet under you. But as you grow and as you develop your practice and you see more stability and more calmness coming into the mind, and you're aware that there is concentration, then it would be wise to challenge the mind. And here the student is suggesting that he might go out into the forest or into the jungle. And the Buddha is suggesting to him that he shouldn't do that because he's not yet ready to do that because he doesn't yet have concentration fully developed. And if he goes out into the forest or into the jungle, that his thoughts could invade him and kind of steal his mind, and he could be essentially sink or float away. But only going out into that solitude once his mind is more concentrated, because then he'll be able to handle that solitude. So what the Buddha is describing here is knowing your practice and knowing where you're at in your practice and knowing about the different challenges that you might need to employ in order to further train the mind. And he's also helping you see here how a student reaches out to a teacher and essentially asks for guidance and asks for help, and suggesting that, yes, this is wise, that if you're having certain challenges in your practice, to reach out to a teacher for personal guidance and ask questions so that you can get help. And of course, it's your practice. You'll make whatever decisions you would like to make, but it's always wise to seek the guidance of somebody who's further along on the path than you. And typically a teacher who you've decided that you would like to learn from is going to be further along on the path, perhaps enlightened or very close to it. So they know what it takes in order to get to enlightenment. So by you asking those questions, you can get insight and guidance that can help contribute to your decision making about your own practice. So what questions do you guys have on this? You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions that you might have. All right, I'm not seeing any questions on this one either. So let's go to chapter 89. Here it's titled 4 times rightly developed and coordinated, gradually culminate into the destruction of the taints. Now remember, the taints or the pollutions, these are the 10 fetters. So the Buddha is describing 4 times to develop and coordinate and gradually culminate into the development and to the destruction of these taints by developing the mind and cultivating the mind, which leads to the destruction of the taints. Monks, these 4 times rightly developed and coordinated gradually culminate in the destruction of the taints. What for? The time for listening to the teachings, the time for discussing the teachings, the time for serenity, and the time for wisdom. These 4 times rightly developed and coordinated gradually culminate in the destruction of the taints, just as when it is raining and the rain pours down in thick droplets on a mountaintop, the water flows down along the slope and fills the clefts, gullies, creeks. These becoming full fill up the pools. These becoming full fill up the lakes. These becoming full fill up the streams. These becoming full fill up the rivers. And these becoming full fill up the great ocean. So too, these 4 times rightly developed and coordinated gradually culminate in the destruction of the taints. So as I mentioned, the taints or the 10 fetters, these are the 10 individual problems that the Buddha discovered about the unenlightened mind. A fetter is like a shackle around your ankle with a chain and a ball, keeping you trapped in the unenlightened state. As long as these pollutions are in your mind, you won't experience the peace and joy of the enlightened mental state. It's impossible as long as your mind's polluted with these 10 fetters. So the Buddha's guiding you in how to build up to a point and develop the mind to a point where you can eliminate these fetters or these taints. And here he's telling you and sharing with you these 4 individual times that lead towards the culmination and development of the mind that leads to the destruction of the taints. The first one is the time for listening to the teachings. That's what you're doing right now. Whether you're attending this class live or you're listening to the replay, you're listening to the teachings. So you're working towards a destruction of the taints. This is one time that you're working to develop that. But then there's other things you need too. There's time for discussing the teachings. The Buddha encouraged, and I also encourage as well, for students to discuss the teachings. You're not teaching each other. You're not designated as a teacher of each other. But by you discussing the teachings with other people, it arises the teachings into the mind and it brings them to the forefront of the mind. So if you're talking with people about loving kindness or compassion or right speech or your meditation practice, and you guys are sharing things that are helping you within your practice or things that you're struggling with and challenged with, this helps to bring the teachings up into the mind so that you're more readily able to practice them in daily life. So not only listening to the teachings, but also discussing them is very wise. Then there's time for serenity. What the Buddha is describing here is time for relaxation and just resting, essentially. I had to teach myself how to do this because I didn't know how to relax and how to rest when I lived in America. I was in the corporate world for a while, and then I had my own businesses for a while. I was go for a significant period of time. I was working 16 to 18 hours a day for extended periods of time, and I was just go all the time. I didn't know how to relax. When it was time to sit down somewhere, my mind was having overactivity and having anxiety and having stress. It was hyperactive, essentially. I couldn't just sit and relax and do nothing. I had to constantly be doing something all the time. So you're going to need to train your mind to listen to the teachings and discuss the teachings, but you're also going to need to find time to relax and just rest and see that as being productive. If you come from a culture where people teach you nose to the grindstone and work all the time, this isn't sustainable. You're going to need time to relax. And if you don't know how to do that yet, you'll need to train your mind how to relax and see that as being productive and helpful, because then you'll be more productive and performing more quality work when you actually are working. That if you can find time to rest and relax, then when it's time to work, you'll be more proficient at that. Then there's this time for wisdom. What the Buddha is describing here is that if you've listened to the teachings, you're discussing the teachings, and you have time to relax, there's also time to apply the teachings in practice. This is where you gain the wisdom. That if you are learning and you're reflecting on the teachings to independently verify them, okay, you're starting to work towards wisdom, but it's not until you actually apply the teachings in your practice that you see the truth with 100% certainty and you have the wisdom of the teachings of the Buddha, of things like the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths and the 5 Precepts and other things like that. You need to apply the teachings that you've learned in practice, and this is where you accumulate and cultivate and develop wisdom through applying the teachings. And this is also where you'll see the transformation of the mind. If you intellectually understand the teachings and you reflect on the teachings, that's an important component of your practice. But if you haven't actually applied the teachings in daily life, your mind isn't going to be fully transformed. You're not going to experience the liberation of mind because you haven't fully transformed the mind by applying the teachings in practice to uproot the pollutions and get these fetters out of the mind. So that's what leads to the destruction of the taints or the 10 fetters or these pollutions, is listening to the teachings, discussing them, having time for rest and relaxation, and then also having time to apply the teachings with wisdom and cultivating the wisdom in your practice. So what questions do you guys have on this particular chapter? All right, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's go to the very last chapter for today, which is chapter 90. It's titled, One Should Be Mindful and Clearly Aware. Monks, a monk should be mindful and clearly aware. This is my instruction to you. And how is a monk mindful? Here, a monk resides reflecting on the body as body, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world, and likewise, with regard to feelings, mind, and mental objects. That is how a monk is mindful. And how is a monk clearly aware? Here, a monk, when going forward or back, is aware of what he is doing. In looking forward or back, he is aware of what he is doing. In bending and stretching, he is aware of what he is doing. In carrying his inner and outer robe in bowl, he is aware of what he is doing. In eating, drinking, chewing, and tasting, he is aware of what he is doing. In passing excrement or urine, he is aware of what he is doing. In walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, in keeping awake, in speaking, or in staying silent, he is aware of what he is doing. That is how a monk is clearly aware. A monk should be mindful and clearly aware. This is my instruction to you. So here, the Buddha is describing two separate things, and I'm going to help you understand them in that way. First, he's describing mindfulness or awareness of mind. And this is the four foundations of mindfulness that we already talked about in this class, is being aware of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the mind, and the mental objects. That mind is the condition of the mind, because you need to be aware of these to be able to gain control and discipline of the mind. So we've already talked about that in this class, so I'm not going to go through it in detail. But now, with that mindfulness and awareness of mind, you need to now practice being aware of what you're doing in any given situation. Practicing singleness of mind, where you're just doing one thing at a time. I'll use one of the things that the Buddha describes here that I think you guys can relate to. Here he's talking about when passing excrement or urinating, that you should be fully aware of what you're doing. Well, you might have experienced this, or you might know people that have experienced this, that they're on the toilet looking at their mobile phone, or they're on the toilet reading a magazine or a newspaper or something like this. And if you've ever done this, you'll notice that it takes a really long time for your body to have the bowel movement or to urinate, because your mind is switching between these two things. And while you're doing this, you might have dropped your phone in the toilet, or you might have dropped it on the floor or something like this. The mind is having a really difficult time because it's trying to do two things at one time. It's switching back and forth. And this is why you have the unwholesome results of dropping the phone in the toilet, because you're making an unwise decision, attempting to get the mind to do more than one thing, and it can't do more than one thing. So if you're talking on the phone, you're watching TV, and you're eating a sandwich, you're going to be having a really hard time practicing something like right speech. So if you're talking to mom, you're not going to be able to have right speech. So you might say something aggressive and harsh or hostile to mom, and now you make your life more difficult, because now you've damaged your relationship, and you've got to go back and clean that up. And you've affected your relationship with your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, or co-workers, or other people. Oftentimes you think you're actually accomplishing more, but really what you're doing is you're rapidly cycling the mind from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. You're making unwise decisions, and therefore you're producing unwholesome results. So the wise decision, based on the natural laws of existence and the natural law of karma, is to understand that doing just one thing at a time, you'll be able to bring forth your full wisdom and your full awareness, do that one thing well, ensure you're making wise decisions, and then you move off to the next thing. But if you're constantly rapidly cycling from thing to thing to thing, your mind is going to be stressed, you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have an overactive mind, you're going to lack concentration, and you're going to make unwise decisions that produce unwholesome results, which means you have to come back and clean that up later. So in addition to meditation and all the other teachings that the Buddha is teaching you, you need to develop your life practice to the point where you're just doing one thing at a time. The Buddha refers to this in other teachings as singleness of mind. Practicing singleness of mind, just doing one thing at a time. As you do this more and more, you'll develop concentration to the point where your mind is always doing that. It's not even going to try to switch or rapidly cycle from thing to thing to thing. You're just always going to be in your groove, so to speak, and practicing right concentration, where you're just doing one thing at a time. So where you see your mind wanting to rapidly cycle from thing to thing to thing, just slow it down, restrain it, pull it back. Just do one thing at a time. And more your mind will get comfortable with this. So if you're eating by yourself and you have the iPad or the phone out, put it away. Your mind might be bored and you might be lonely when you're first starting to do that. But that's the problem, that you're having craving, desire, attachment. You're not going to fix that by having the iPad or the phone. You need to get rid of that and push it away and train your mind to be able to just focus on eating, for example. The Buddha describes that while you're eating, just focus on eating or drinking or chewing or tasting, right? So just focus on one thing at a time. Don't allow the mind to take on this iPad or the phone or listening to music. Just one thing at a time, and your mind will become more and more peaceful and content with that, because you'll see all the results of being able to bring your full wisdom into making wise decisions that lead to wholesome results, and you're going to get this focus and concentration beyond anything you ever imagined. So what questions do you guys have on this? This is our last chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, so that means you must be understanding what I've shared so far to a certain degree. And what I'm going to do to end class is just remind you that our next class, next Saturday, we're going to be moving into the next 10 chapters. So we went up to chapter 90 today, so that means we're going to be in chapter 91 to 100 next week. And you can study these beforehand if you like, because you've got the words of the Buddha, the reference, and then the words that I'm sharing with you to help you reflect and gain more benefit out of what the Buddha is sharing with you. And you can download this by going to buddhadailywisdom.com, and there's a link for free books. And from there, you can download volume 3, and you'll see what it is that we're going to be teaching next week. And that way, you might actually have certain points of clarification that you need. So if you're reading either before and or after class, this is going to further help you solidify the teachings. Now, if you're just coming to the class and that's all, okay, that's what you can do. But if you can add in this other component, this is really going to help you. And then, of course, if you're meditating, that's going to help you as well. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing the group learning program at the same time, Sunday at 9 p.m. Thai time, where I'm going to be sharing with you chapter 12 of volume 1. This is the foundational text that students start in the group learning program, which is a 7-month program. This chapter is titled, Craving is the Problem, What is the Solution? Here, I'm going to be sharing with you the Four Noble Truths as a refresher, because as we move into chapter 13, you need to be able to deeply understand and have soaked into the mind the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, what the problem is, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. Because in chapter 13, I'm going to teach you how to identify your cravings and how to analyze the mind and eradicate the cravings above and beyond meditation and generosity. There's a specific aspect of your practice that you need to develop as a tool in order to eliminate the craving, desires, attachments from the mind. And I'm going to be teaching you that in a combination between chapter 12 and 13 in the next 2 Sundays. And then, of course, on Wednesday, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation together in our group learning program, where we can come together to support, encourage, and motivate each other in our meditation practice. So you're welcome to join for Sunday, Wednesday, and or Saturday in these classes, either here, listening to the replay, or you can join at the temple here in Chiang Mai, where I teach at 9 a.m. in the morning. So we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.